Do you believe that all religions can be true?
I do. It's a different means to the same end, I believe. The same end is finding purpose.
I personally don't believe in any particular religion, and it is up to the individual to decide which beliefs and which tenets they adhere to and which ones they resonate with.
No one can really say someone else's religion is wrong because we grow up in a religion. So when you're born into something, you believe it to the fullest extent.
That's a tough question to answer, really, I think.
I believe there's a possibility that they can all be true at once.
I don't particularly care what anybody else's beliefs are. I'm more of a scientific person myself.
Do you believe that all religions can be true at the same time?
I mean, they kind of conflict each other, so not really.
I do not believe that all religions can be true, but that's my opinion. No one really knows.
My personal belief is that everyone really has their own religion, and I would say that they're all similar in some bases. Like they're like opposite sides of the same coin.
All religions have their own truth because we kind of all believe that there's kind of a bigger power, or most people believe that. I personally believe that Christ is the way.
If you believe it and you feel good about it, then I think you have a right to believe in it and that it's true.
Most definitely, they all can be true at the same time. They're all equally legitimate.
I believe that everyone has the right to religion. I believe everyone has the right to practice their own religion. So, I mean, if it's true to them, then, go for it.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Morrow, and I'm the Director of Cultural Engagement and one of the teaching faculty here at Impact 360 Institute. And one of my great passions in life is helping equip students and families to think well about the questions that matter. I've been a husband for 15 years now, and I'm a father of 3. I want to welcome you to this course where we'll explore truth together. You're welcome to believe whatever you want to believe today, just so long as you don't believe it's actually true. And if it happens to be about spiritual things or moral things, then you just need to keep that to yourself. And if you happen to be a Christian, you can believe that stuff within the confines of your own mind, but don't you dare try to push that on somebody else. Welcome to an increasingly secular culture. But don't be discouraged. You and I can learn how to move and breathe in today's cultural climate. How? By drawing close to Christ and applying our minds to truth. So stick with me. Here's author and apologist Sean McDowell on some of the challenges Christians are facing at this cultural moment and how we can engage well.
Yeah, I find a lot of people will ask me what it's like to be in a post-Christian culture. I don't think we live in a post-Christian culture. Number one, that assumes our culture used to be Christian, and I'm not sure that's ever fully the case, although it was influenced by Christian ideas. But second, I think our culture is better characterized as anti-Christian. I think in just the past few years, we've reached the point where it will actually cost people something to believe in and follow the Christian faith. It could cost you your job, it could cost you your reputation, it could cost you finances. And we're seeing this happening, I think, with persecution for people believing there's such a thing as truth. God has oriented the world a certain way and refusing to compromising it. The temperature is being turned up in our culture, and Christians are being persecuted. Now, I don't want to compare that to the persecution in the past that Christians faced, being thrown to the lions and being, even in other countries in the world, it's so much worse than it is in America. But I do want to say we need to wake up and realize that there's more of a tension taking place right now between those who embrace the traditional Christian worldview and those who want to buy the ideas of our secular culture. And that's why we need to start making a decision early what we believe and why we believe it. So to me, the perfect example is Daniel. In the book of the Bible, here's Daniel, and he's in a foreign land in Babylon. They had been exiled from from the promised land. And Daniel is brought in by the king. He's given good food. He has all the reason to give in and compromise to fit in with his culture. But it says in Daniel 1:8 that Daniel determined in his heart not to defile himself. That's past tense. Daniel already knew coming into this circumstance that he was not going to compromise his belief system, whether it cost him his life. And God honored him. So we need right now, whether from young all the way up, to decide certain things we think are true and not compromise it. But second, This doesn't take God by surprise. He's not sitting up there and going, oh man, this culture's turned against Christians. What do we do? You look throughout the history of the world, even the Old Testament. Elijah is the only one who's following God in the land, and God used him, and he ultimately brought in transformation through that. So realize God is sovereign. This is not the time to get negative, to get angry, to get scared. It's a time to think through what we believe, be ready for it, stand on principle, and believe that God is working, even amidst some of the difficulties we may face for standing up for biblical truth.
We've all heard the slogans. They're everywhere. Who are you to judge? That's just your truth. That may be true for you, but that's not true for me. There are many ways to God. Why do you have to insist that Jesus is the only way to God? Why are you Christians so intolerant? And you should just let people live however they want to live as long as they don't hurt anybody. People should be free to believe whatever they want. It doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere. If you would have grown up in India, you would have been a Hindu. And that's just your interpretation of the Bible. Are you prepared to respond to these kinds of challenges? In his classic book on the state of modern education, The Closing of the American Mind, Alan Bloom famously concluded, there is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes or says he believes that truth is relative. According to leading sociologist Christian Smith, 47% of American emerging adults agreed that morals are relative. There are not definite rights and wrongs for everybody. As one of the emerging adults put it in this survey, I guess what makes something right is how I feel about it. But different people feel different ways. So I couldn't speak on behalf of anyone else as to what's right and wrong. According to a 2009 study by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, based on interviews with 35,000 adults and out of a sample size of 9,472 evangelicals, a startling 57% of evangelical adults agreed with the statement, many religions can lead to eternal life. And in case you missed this, that's not just 57% of Americans, but 57% of people who self-identify as evangelical, Bible-believing Christians. So any way you slice it, odds are that half of the people you run into each day will believe that moral truth is relative and that there's more than one way to God. The Hebrew prophet Isaiah hit the nail on the head more than 2,700 years ago. Justice is turned back and righteousness stands far away, for truth has stumbled in the public squares and uprightness cannot enter. And these words penned by the author of the book of Judges could have been written yesterday. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. In our 7 sessions together, we're going to explore truth. We're going to put these slogans to the test. We're going to ask the hard questions, and we will examine the implications of some popular but really bad ideas. After engaging the material in this course, you'll be equipped to respond with clear thinking to the emotional and intellectual challenges of relativism and pluralism in our culture today. You'll arrive at a deeper understanding of why truth matters so much and how knowing the truth can set you free to live with confidence according to God's design. And you'll be prepared to help others around you break free from the riptide of relativism. Sometimes you need to look back before you can move forward. So the first thing we need to do is take a few steps back and find out what happened to truth. Our culture hasn't always been intolerant of Christian ideas, so how did we get here? It's hard to come up with a more appropriate illustration of the shift in our culture towards relativism than the Merriam-Webster Dictionary's Word of the Year in 2006. Amazingly, it came from the late-night Comedy Central show, The Colbert Report, where Stephen Colbert coined the term truthiness. Here's how Colbert describes this phenomenon. It used to be everyone was entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. But that's not the case anymore. Facts matter not at all. Perception is everything. Truthiness is what I say is right, and nothing anyone else says could possibly be true. It's not only that I feel it to be true, but that I feel it to be true. Truthiness is everywhere in our culture today. The vast majority of students I speak to and teach have this all over them. And if you watch the news, movies, and TV shows, you'll begin to see this stuff everywhere as well. It's kind of like this. When I was in college, I was on a stateside summer mission project in Clearwater Beach, Florida, and I worked at the Waffle House. And if you've ever been to the Waffle House, then you know that you don't leave the Waffle House without taking some of the Waffle House with you. You just kind of have this sheen, this layer of grease, this smell on you as you leave the Waffle House. Well, that's kind of what it's like to grow up in our culture. You just get this truthiness on you that everything's relative to what you believe as an individual, and that just becomes your default setting for understanding and interpreting spiritual and moral claims. Colbert may have invented the word, but not the reality it describes. This way of approaching truth has been 300 years in the making and is the unfortunate legacy of the Enlightenment. As you'll remember, the Enlightenment was a European intellectual movement of the late 17th and 18th centuries, emphasizing reason and individualism rather than tradition. Philosophers like René Descartes, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant were among the most influential thinkers of this era. If history has taught us anything, it's that ideas have consequences. What's taught in one generation in the classroom becomes the next generation's first principles, their starting point. Before it was truthiness, it was known as the fact-value split. Francis Schaeffer's famous illustration of a two-story house makes the fact-value split assumed in our culture easier to see. In this house, there's an upper story and a lower story. The lower story consists of facts from the hard sciences, which would involve disciplines like biology, chemistry, genetics, and physics. These facts are assumed to be true for everyone and would be publicly verifiable. In the upper story is where values and opinions live. This is where you will find words like preferences, feelings, and faith, and these are assumed to be true for the individual. As opposed to publicly available facts, you now have personally and socially constructed meanings. The topics you explore in the upper story are God, religion, morality, and meaning. In our age of science, what happened to spiritual and moral facts? Well, guess what? You can't measure those in a lab. You can't do a chemistry experiment on them. There's not an equation that explains them. Therefore, those become increasingly viewed as mere expressions of emotion. That doesn't make me feel good, or a taste or a preference. I don't like that. Underneath all of the slogans and sound bites, this fact-value split is what's driving this truthiness idea deep into the hearts and minds of students and deep into the hearts and minds of professors, politicians, lawyers, historians, filmmakers, and journalists. Our universities have been deeply affected as well. As C. John Somerville observes in The Decline of the Secular University, we used to talk about truth, but now we talk about tolerance. Harvard University was founded on the idea of veritas, the Latin word for truth. The words of Jesus recorded in John 8:32, "The truth shall set you free," are entrenched in the tradition of Harvard. The seal at Yale University includes the Latin words lux et veritas, light and truth. These Ivy League schools used to see a direct connection between God's Word and God's world. There was a unified and holistic pursuit of truth, but this is no longer the case. The idea that only the hard sciences give us truth is deeply embedded in higher education today. Two other significant ideas we need to explore if we're to understand what happened to truth in our culture today are overemphasizing feelings and confusing freedom with ultimate personal autonomy. One of the main reasons truth has fallen on hard times today is that our culture has overemphasized emotions. Emotions are powerful and important, but they are not ultimate. We have shifted from a thinking culture to a feeling culture over the past century. If you pay attention to how most people talk, they will begin their statements with, "I feel that," rather than, "I think that" kind of language. The problem is that you can't argue with or debate a feeling. And this has led many in our culture to behave as if how they feel determines moral and spiritual reality. We now collectively think with our feelings. Closely connected to this is a deeply entrenched misunderstanding of freedom. We have confused freedom with ultimate personal autonomy. So not only do I feel a certain way, but now I understand freedom as giving me the right to create my own reality without external constraints of any kind. Hey, it's my life, isn't it? No one's going to tell me what to do. I'm the captain of my own ship, and I am free. So when a truth claim seems to infringe upon a person's freedom to satisfy his or her own desires, guess which one will win? The modern understanding of freedom is at odds with how freedom has classically been understood. It used to be the ability to do as I ought to do, not to do whatever I want whenever I want. Ironically, we are most free when we cooperate with reality. The main thing you need to take away from that short historical survey is that this fact-value split is now just assumed in our culture. No one even argues about this anymore. In the sessions ahead, we will engage this cultural assumption and show not only why it is false, but also how it is at odds with historic Christianity. For as Francis Schaeffer reminds us, Christianity is not a series of truths in the plural, but rather truth spelled with a capital T. Truth about total reality, not just about religious things. Biblical Christianity is truth concerning total reality and the intellectual holding of that total truth and then living in light of that truth. Nancy Pearcey makes the powerful observation that a society's view of truth functions as the intellectual gatekeeper in the public arena. It determines which ideas are taken seriously and which never even make it to the table. So when someone says to you, "That's true for you, but not for me," what do you do with that? You need to understand how they're thinking, and you need to be prepared to thoughtfully engage these kinds of expressions of relative truth. We must resist this privatization and secularization of truth. Hang in there with me, this is not as hard as you might think. In this session, we gained some important context about the secular culture in which we live. First, at least half of the people you interact with on a regular basis think truth is relative. Next, the fact-value split is simply assumed in our culture. And finally, we saw that relativism is being driven by an overemphasis on feelings and a deep misunderstanding of freedom. In our next session, we're going to answer the critical question, what is truth?